Hello to everybody. This is Cristina Mattiello again, and I'm here to share with you Unit 5, which is about people with disabilities. As you can see, this text, the text of this unit, is written by Luciano Ardesi, who is a sociologist and vice president of CIPAX, in Italian we say CIPAX, which is Interreligious Center for Peace, the association of which I'm the president. So now I'm going to read his text for him. People with Disabilities Index. As usual, here we have the index of the unit in detail, so you can find all the slides very easily. There are 32 slides, and the last one, as usual, is the bibliography. And let's start with slide 3, Disabilities, Barriers and Words. Each of us has a daily experience with a person with a disability. One of the most obvious examples is when we see a person who for some reason is confined to a wheelchair because they can't walk. This person must then overcome barriers to move, such as going up or down some stairs or a sidewalk. These movements are not always easy. Sometimes they're even impossible. But the first barrier that the person with a disability has to fear is not the environmental one. In English, the word handicap was long used to indicate a person unable to perform movements, actions, or express themselves. Today, this term has been abandoned, overcome, and the term disability is the right term. However, the use of handicap is still common in several European countries. Try to look for it in your country's language to be aware of the use of language in this field. Slide 4, the Cultural Revolution. It took a long journey to overcome environmental and mental barriers. At the beginning of this millennium, with the crucial contribution of people with disabilities themselves, who organized their own associations, a cultural revolution in the approach of disability took place. The first step was to consider those living with disabilities as persons, who as such have the same rights and enjoy the same freedoms as all the other people do. The focus, therefore, is no longer on those deprived of or affected by something, but on their rights and freedoms as individuals. Let's try to understand better. Everyone has the right to move. If I can't walk, it's not because, for example, I've lost the use of both legs, but because society hasn't provided aids like a wheelchair or removed obstacles like stairs or provided a supportive environment like ramps or elevators that allow me to move. The turning point came with the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, approved by the United Nations General Assembly on December the 13th, 2006, by a large majority of member states, and after a long process. The convention entered into force on May the 3rd, 2008, and is mandatory for states that have ratified it. So the convention put an end to an approach that considered persons with disabilities only as a health problem or as objects of charitable action. Slide 5. But what do we mean by disability? The Convention emphasizes that disability is not a condition of the person, as it was once believed, but rather the consequence of the interaction between the person and their environment. It is therefore the environment and no longer the person's condition that determines disability. The Convention defines disability as, I'm quoting, something which results from the interaction between persons and impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. Aware of the complexity and of the cost that policies to break down these barriers can imply, the International Convention speaks of reasonable arrangements to overcome them. The Convention also emphasizes that disability is an evolving concept. Just think of the evolution of technology, which introduces new possibilities on one hand, but also new barriers and difficulties for people on the others. Slide 6. Who are people with disabilities? We usually think that people with disabilities are much more than we think. If we carefully look at our own experiences, we can easily find a moment in our lives when we experienced a disability, even if temporary, such a broken leg or arm or a long-term illness that immobilized us for some time. Disability is therefore a very common condition. The World Health Organization, WHO, currently estimates that 1.3 billion people worldwide, the 16% of the global population, experience a significant disability during their lifetime. And these numbers are constantly increasing. One of the most significant factors is undoubtedly the increasing of old people within the population of many countries. Non-transmissible diseases are also on the rise, and these and other factors connected with the physical, economic, technological, social, and cultural environment are increasingly causing more people a condition of disability. In slide 7, we see some data about people with disabilities in Europe. In Europe, the situation is not different from the rest of the world, with some peculiarities. According to Eurostat, in 2023, the 27% of the European people over 16 years had some form of disabilities. 101 million people, 1 in 4 adults. Latvia, 40.7%, Denmark, 36.7%, and Portugal, 34.8%, are the countries with the highest percentages of people with disabilities. European higher incidence depends, on one hand, on better statistical reliability, on the other, on the increasing of old people in the population. The older the person, the higher the percentage. From 16 to 19 years old, 6.9% of people with disabilities. From 20 to 24, 9.4%. From 25 to 34, 11.6. From 35 to 44, 14.7%. from 45 to 64, 26.8%. From 65 or more, 51.7%. And finally, women with disabilities. In 2023, their percentage was higher than men's percentage in all European members. Women are the 29.2% of the total population in this field, while men are the 24.3%. Slide 8, conditions of people with disability in Europe. The most important feeling of people with disabilities is discrimination. 52% of them, according to a Eurobarometer survey, say that they feel discriminated. In 2020, the 17.7% of people with disabilities from 20 to 26 were unemployed, compared to 8.6% of people without disabilities of the same age. In 2023, the 28.8% of people with disabilities were at risk of poverty or social exclusion, compared to 18% of people without disabilities. The school dropout rate among people with disabilities is double that of those without disabilities. Only the 29% of them earn a high school degree, compared to the 44% of those without disabilities. Many young people with disabilities attend special schools, and it is very difficult for them to get access to education and vocational training. Access to health care and prevention is more difficult for people with disabilities. They're also very vulnerable to violence. The 17% of them have experienced it, compared to the 8% of people without disabilities. Violence can occur both at home and in care facilities. Rights of people with disabilities. The 26th International Convention does not establish new rights, but starting from the general principle according to which a person with disabilities is a person and such enjoys all rights and freedoms, the Convention highlights some general principles. Article 3. Respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choice and independence of persons. Non-discrimination, full and effective participation and inclusion in society. Respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. Equality of opportunity. Accessibility. Equality between men and women. Respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities, and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve their identities. Slide 10. Let's close the disabilities factories. From all this, it is clear that society can be a disability factory if it is not organized so that it can include and respect all people. Society and the environment, which society constantly transforms, must therefore change and become places of inclusion, relationships, and opportunities for all the people, including those with disabilities. Society, in all its contexts, from family to school, from work to culture, from institutions to politics, from the countryside to the city, must be prepared and adapted to promote inclusion and participation of all people, regardless of their starting conditions. Disability factories must close to become meeting and inclusion places. In slide 11, we see some health classifications. Health classifications and disability. The 26th Convention marks the overcoming of an essentially medical approach to disability. This shift in perspective also led to the evolution of the health classification themselves, which had been developed by the World Health Organization, WHO. Therefore, from seeing disability as an illness and the person with a disability as a subject requiring treatment, they got to a new dimension, a wholly new dimension. In 2001, while the debate that would lead to the convention was going on, the WHO adopted the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, more commonly known as ICF, which is a classification of health and health-related domains. As the functioning and disability of an individual occurs in a context, ICF also includes a list of environmental factors. ICF is the WHO framework for measuring health and disability at both individual and population levels. It provides unambiguous terms of reference that can be useful for statistical surveys and the healthcare and administrative protocols. Its approach is more complex, bio, psychological, and social, but it does not fully reflect the centrality of people's rights and their potential evolution, as the Convention does. Although the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health has been improved several times since 2001, here we will refer only to the Convention. In the International Convention and in the experience of persons with disabilities, the fundamental prerequisite for the enjoyment of rights is equality and non-discrimination. A person with a disability in a special situation, but this does not mean that they're not equal to all the others in rights and freedom. Equality is therefore the prerequisite for enjoying the same rights and freedoms as all the other people. We know that in real life, there are many situations in which equality is not guaranteed, and we can see acts of discrimination on the only basis of a person's disability, in the family context, at school, in workplaces, in the media, in culture, and so on. Non-discrimination is therefore the primary form of equality between people, and the first principle to be respected towards persons with disabilities. They must have guaranteed the same opportunity to participate in the social, cultural, and economic life of all other persons. Slide 12. Equality and not discrimination. In the International Convention and in the experience of persons with disabilities, the fundamental prerequisite to really enjoy rights is equality and not discrimination. If a person with a disability is in a special situation, or so-called special situation, compared to the situation of other people, this should not mean that they're not equal to all the others in rights and freedoms. Equality is therefore the prerequisite for enjoying the same rights and freedoms as all other people. We know that there actually are many situations in which this equality is not guaranteed, and discrimination is carried out only because of a person's disability. This happens in the family, at school, at work, in the media, in culture, and so on. Non-discrimination is therefore the primary form of equality between people, and it is the first principle that must be observed towards people with disabilities. All persons with disabilities must therefore be ensured and guaranteed the same opportunity to participate in social, cultural, and economic life as all the other persons do. Slide 13, inclusion. A person with a disability, however, needs to receive a positive action to have a possibility to enjoy equal dignity and rights as others. Inclusion is the positive, effective action that enables a person with a disability to be effectively free from discrimination. Inclusion must be considered a person with a disability's right. Inclusion naturally starts from words, as we said at the beginning of this unit. A person with a disability, especially if a young person, must have access to education and training. Schools and universities must include them without any discrimination. A person with a disability must be able to have a job, which is the only thing that can guarantee a person's full human dignity. They do not need compassion, pity, or commiseration, but rather opportunities to live an independent life. A person with a disability must be able to enjoy a relational and emotional life. A person with a disability must be able to participate in the social and cultural life of their country. A person with a disability must be able to participate in political and institutional life too. Let's now see each of these aspects. Slide 14, stigma and inclusive words. In many countries and cultures, people with disabilities are seen in a negative way, and attitudes towards them are based on prejudice and negative stereotypes. Even today, people with disabilities suffer from social and cultural stigmatization. We have already noted that degrading and offensive expressions toward people with disabilities are still used in some language, or in all language, we can say. In the dominant culture of many countries, the use of disprecative words towards people with disabilities to offend others, opponents, or enemies still remains. This use reflects the persistence of prejudice against people with disabilities on one hand, and a culture of hatred and contempt toward people whose ideas and action we disagree with on the other. Most serious is that also political and institutional representatives sometimes use degrading concepts and thus encourage linguistically and culturally incorrect attitudes among the population towards people with disabilities. It is clear that the use of correct words must begin with the education of younger generations and must guide the activities of all institutions and mass media. We know that here too, especially social media, are where offensive and discriminatory words and images are most easily used against people with disabilities. Slide 15, accessible education. Education and training at all levels, from primary to university and postgraduate courses, must be accessible to people with disabilities. First of all, there must be no discrimination of any kind, including regulatory or administrative discrimination. We must also ensure physical accessibility to places of education and training, removing all physical barriers and providing specific learning and training aids for all disabilities. There are many examples, including sign language for people with hearing difficulties, braille text for blind people, computer aids, tablets, personal computers for writing, and so on. For a full inclusive education, learning processes for people with disabilities must take place in the same places and environments where all the other people have access to education. In other words, we do not need any special places which risk to marginalize people with disabilities and prevent their inclusion. Slide 16, inclusive education. It is essential to create a welcoming environment for all people with disabilities. We must promote welcoming attitudes, value diversity, contrast stereotypes and prejudice, and encourage empathy and collaboration among students. The whole school, where the educational process takes place, must be involved in inclusion. It cannot be a specific teacher's responsibility in specific times. Inclusion must be a constant commitment for all those who work in the school with any role. The administration must also be involved and able to provide accessible and inclusive services. It is necessary to build a network between schools, families, volunteers, associations, and local services to guarantee integrated and personalized actions. Monitoring and evaluating the school inclusion process and its outcomes is very important. Education must also develop the autonomy of the people with disabilities, their ability to express judgments, manage their needs, take independent decisions. It must prepare them to actively participate in society. Slide 17. Work as emancipation. Work is the most obvious condition for ensuring a person's dignity, also a person with disabilities' dignity. Through work, a person with a disability promotes themselves, their families, their communities, and even the country they live in. Here too, the principle of non-discrimination is decisive. When a disability prevents a person from performing specific tasks, the work assigned to them must not be considered a sort of special unit or confinement that could undermine their dignity. It is therefore clear that education is of crucial importance in promoting full inclusion. It is also important that people with disabilities are not discriminated against in terms of pay, working conditions and hours, vacations, leave, or retirement. Work is essential to the development of autonomy, that is, the ability to act and take decisions in an independent way. It is also important to have an active policy that promotes, through appropriate incentives, the hiring of people with disabilities in the public and private sectors. Slide 18, inclusive relationships. To develop relationships of all kinds must be possible for a person with disabilities. First of all, they have the right to an inclusive family in which they can express their relation life. They also need relationships outside the family. Culture and the surrounding environment must embrace this need, overcoming prejudice and stereotypes, including those affecting their emotional lives. Also, to satisfy their natural need for sexuality must be possible for them, although too often it still is a taboo. Society and the cultural world must be open to the profound and original contributions of people with disabilities and must establish stable and inclusive relationships with them. Slide 19, inclusion, participation, interaction. We have seen that the concept of inclusion is fundamental to guarantee the rights and dignity of individuals, and this is for all people with or without disabilities. It is important to point out that inclusion must be seen in a dynamic and evolutive sense. It does not mean just to let a person into a school, an office, a work environment, etc. Inclusion means that a person must be able to participate in the activities of the environment in which they are, and then there must be an interaction with all the other people on a level of equal dignity. The environment, school, office, factory, etc., must therefore adapt to people and not vice versa. I'd like to remember this again. It is the environment which has to adapt to people with disabilities and not people with disabilities to the environment. For this reason, we clearly differentiate inclusion from integration. Integration requires individuals to adapt to their environment, its needs, and its values. Inclusion, on the other hand, is a dynamic process in which all members of a community, whatever its nature, interact and contribute to a social, economic, and cultural environment where the rights, dignity, and freedom of each person are guaranteed. They actively participate in ensuring that this environment achieves and maintains the characteristics which are necessary for all people to live well. Slide 20. People with a disability who made history. To clearly be aware of the contribution that people with disability have given to society, culture, and science, at this point we must remember some of the people with disabilities who have contributed to shape history in many fields. Homer, the great ancient Greek poet, who, according to tradition, gave us unforgettable poems such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, was blind. Ludwig van Beethoven, the great German composer, gradually became deaf, but this did not prevent him from composing extraordinary music, such as the Ninth Symphony, when he was completely deaf. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as the President of the United States from 1933 to 1945, although polio had paralyzed his lower limbs and forced him to move around in a wheelchair. Frida Kahlo, the Mexican painter, very well known, continued her artistic career despite an accident that severed her spine, forcing her movements for all her life. Stephen Hawking, the English scientist who suffered from ALS, carried on fundamental research work in numerous fields. including the study of the cosmos and the quantum mechanics. Andrea Bocelli, the Italian tenor, lost his sight in an accident as a child and overcome his visual disability by developing his other senses. In slide 21, we talk about the organizations of people with disabilities. Full social inclusion is accomplished also through participation in the social, political, and institutional bodies of the community and of the country. To achieve this, it is important that people with disabilities can freely associate to raise awareness of their needs, foster a culture of inclusion, and above all, active participation. People with disability organizations play a fundamental role as reference for cultural bodies and institutions at all levels, local, regional, and national. These organizations are essential for promoting rights, removing all obstacles, and enabling the active participation of people with disabilities in the life of the country. It is important that these organizations include the most vulnerable among people with disabilities, women, young people, and minors. People with disabilities and their organizations have a very strong demand, a fundamental slogan: nothing about us without us. This means that people with disabilities must be able to participate in the decision-making processes related to them. Slide 22, effective participation and evolving relationships. The concept nothing about us without us expresses both a need and the right to participation. Participation can develop in many ways and contexts: in the family, in the community, village, condominium units, neighborhood, in society, in institutions, local, national, international, multilateral. Participation does not only mean prior consultation, perhaps to evaluate the approval of an already taken decision. Effective participation means that the opinions and the proposals of people with disabilities and their organizations are heard and taken into consideration, and that the organization can take part in the decision-making process. The final decision must then explain the reasons why the proposals, or some of them, were not taken into consideration, thus making the decision-making process democratic and transparent. People with disabilities have the same rights as others, and therefore must participate in decisions, even in matters that do not directly affect them. They are not special individuals separated from the rest of society. This too is inclusion. This process of participation and inclusion is the most effective way to change the relationship which surround people with disabilities. This will eliminate stereotypes, prejudice, and offensive and excluding remarks about people with disabilities. New relationships will be possible, fully respecting the rights, freedom, and dignity of each person. In slide 23, we can see the state's obligations. These specific principles and rights will remain on paper without public institutions' commitment to implement them. This is why the 2006 Convention establishes specific obligations for those states which have ratified the Convention. These are legislative, administrative, or any other measures helping to achieve the objectives of the Convention. Modification or elimination of all laws and practices that imply discrimination against people with disabilities. Adoption of policies and programs that consider the protection and promotion of the rights of persons with disabilities. Ensuring that any goods or services can, through reasonable accommodation, meet the needs of persons with disabilities. Research and development of all tools, including technological tools, necessary for persons with disabilities. Providing information accessible to persons with disabilities. Training of the operators who will interact with persons with disabilities. Slide 24, single countries institutions. The International Convention gives mandate to the single states to implement these provisions. The state's first and fundamental duty is therefore to incorporate those provisions into legislation. This can be done with a single law adapting all the single provisions of the International Convention or with multiple laws, many different laws. As we have seen, since the concept of disability is evolving, it is essential that these standards be updated as conditions change. Financial resources at various levels are also necessary to make these norms effective. It is also of crucial importance that observers monitor the applications of the standards, the allocation of financial resources, and more generally, the effectiveness of the measures which have been taken, any possible lacks, and the situation of persons with disabilities. Service evaluations, statistics must be the object of public reports to allow society as a whole and the media to become aware of the success, potential shortcomings, and critical issues about the adopted policies. The Convention also contains an optional protocol which, as its name suggests, ratifying states are not obliged to adopt. This protocol creates an international experts committee on the rights of persons with disabilities. The committee examines the periodic reports that states are required to submit, communicates with states for the correct implementation of the Convention, and examines complaints of individuals or of their organization regarding alleged violation of the rights of persons with disabilities. The committee then issues communications which are made public and which may include recommendations to the non-compliant state. Slide 25, the European Union and disabilities. The European Union has ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and has adopted rules prohibiting discrimination. In 2019, it approved a directive on the accessibility requirements of products and services. It has also implemented an active policy to overcome these barriers by harmonizing national rules on the functioning of the internal market. The directive entered into force in June 2025. The deadline for companies to adapt their products and services. It has also implemented policies to overcome barriers and discrimination. In early 2021, the European Union launched a Union of Equality. European Commission presents strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities 2021 to 2030 to ensure their full participation in society on an equal basis with others in the European Union and beyond it, in line with the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which establish equality and non-discrimination as cornerstones of European Union policies. Practical tools include the European Disability Card, which is a European card, both digital and paper, that facilitates access to discounts and benefits from museum, transportation, and cultural activities throughout the European Union. The European parking permit, currently being standardized across Europe to ensure, to guarantee that holders enjoy the same parking rights in another member state as local residents. Slide 26, multifactorial discrimination. A policy aimed to ensure, to guarantee that the person with a disability can fully enjoy the same rights and opportunities as other people must consider that disability is accompanied by other factors that can make it even more discriminating. Geographical location, gender, age, education level, poverty, urban or rural environment, violence, wars, emergency situations. To help overcome this multifactorial discrimination, the European Union supports projects and programs to improve the lives of people with disabilities. Slide 27. People with disabilities in emergencies and wars. All kinds of emergencies, such as earthquakes, cyclones, fires, floods, volcanic eruptions, and so on, reveal how adaptation and safety facilities for persons with disabilities are very insufficient. Most of the times, emergency plans fail to include ways to provide assistance to persons with disabilities. Disability associations themselves are often not involved in the study and development of appropriate assistance methods. Yet climate change is teaching us that increasing frequent and intense emergencies are on, involving entire populations. If you look at statistics at the global, or better yet, national or regional level, we realize that significant percentages of the population are at risk that they will not receive adequate rescue. The same for wars, especially because they can last for years. Let's not forget that emergencies, and especially wars, also cause disability. Indeed, historically, wars have been the greatest producers of people with disabilities. When wars were fought on one front, soldiers were those who experienced disability, the so-called mutilated. In the new wars that know no borders but affect entire territories, the civilian population is the main victim of violence. This violence, when it doesn't lead to death, often leaves people with more or less permanent disabilities. Slide 28. Events to unite, not to differentiate. The positive effect of increased empathy and awareness about people with disabilities is the spread of opportunities and events where the attention is upon them. First of all, their presence is important because it breaks the taboo that has long surrounded people with disabilities, their invisibility. Music, games, theater, dance, sports, art, and other public events have become a way to make people with disabilities protagonists, visible, no longer forced to hide. The risk is to emphasize once again that these are events and people which stay apart. Take the Paralympics, for instance, the Olympic Games in which people with disabilities compete. There's a risk of considering them something separate for those who cannot compete at the level of real athletes. It's time to instead consider the Paralympics as an integral part of the Olympics Games. They're not separate sports, but the same sport in diversity. The values of sport, of every sport, is the same, whoever practices it. Whether they win or lose, they share the same commitment, the same passion, same flag. Slide 29, the role of civil society. We have already talked about the role of the organizations of people with disabilities in promoting their rights and inclusion. These associations are not the only ones which have to work for these goals. It is crucial that civil society associations, whatever their goals and objectives may be, promote rights and inclusion. This involves many aspects, for example, accessibility of their offices and meeting places, accessibility of their communication tools, involvement and presence of representatives of people with disabilities in discussions regarding the rights, inclusion, employment, education of people in general. Slide 30. To reflect and not forget. Every year on December the 3rd, the International Day of Persons with Disabilities is celebrated worldwide. It was proclaimed in 1981 and commemorates the day the World Action Programme for Persons with Disabilities was adopted. Each year, the United Nations chooses a specific subject to explore the various aspects of disability and promote awareness, respect for the already existing legislation, and remove the barriers that still obstacles the full enjoyment of the rights for persons with disabilities. Lights and shadows on disability. The long struggle of people with disabilities and their associations and networks has certainly improved our vision of disability. However, various national observatories and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities have repeated and pointed out that failures of states and conditions of legal and de facto discrimination are a problem we have to face, we still have to face. This is clearly a journey that must continue with even greater awareness. This is why the associations of people with disabilities deserve our attention and our support. Above all, we must begin from ourselves, behaving in a respectful and inclusive way towards people with disabilities. And now in slide 32, you have the bibliography for this unit, some books, and then some sites, websites. Thank you so much. Our work is ended here. Goodbye to everyone.